Good evening again from Metro Manila, the Philippines, Southeastern Asia. Today, I sadly learned that the student whom I've been teaching off and on for 4 months in a private English tutorial has decided to take a break, partly because of his midterm exams, without informing me or giving me a warning beforehand. But anyway, life goes on, and from tomorrow on, I will once again, by God's grace, trusting in His power and mercy, start seeking additional teaching work, because 3 hours of teaching per week obviously is not enough to live on, and a person whose passion, or one of whose passions, is teaching, like is the case for me, definitely wants to be teaching 5 days per week, not just on 3 days per week. Anyway, in that oral communication strategies book, which has been one of our 3 main textbooks, we have been covering presenting, or started to cover presenting, yesterday during our so-called mini lesson of maybe 30 to 40 minutes. Anyway, presenting or presentation means simply that a person talks about some topic to an audience. Of course, nowadays, especially because of the digital media, it's possible for even a large group of people to be simultaneously talking about or otherwise expressing their ideas about one or more topics to multiple audiences. The people are present physically, and they can number nowadays even in the millions. And of course, the digital audience can easily number now in the billions, because of the internet, because of the television, and because of the radio. And obviously there is an exchange of thoughts, there is an exchange of emotions, and if it is a dialogue-like presentation, there is a simultaneous or spontaneous or open exchange of information as well. The places are multiple. They can be small rooms, schools, churches, and other places for religious worship. They can be hospitals, they can be health centers, they can be psychological or psychiatric clinics. They can be shopping centers, they can be city or town halls, they can be city or town squares, they can even be streets, technically even highways. Nowadays, technically, it's possible even to make one's presentation in a valley or on a high mountain and in a forest, and still have an audience that numbers in the billions if the internet and television and other digital connections work properly. And the 21st century technology allows people to see the presentation's main arguments on big screens, and there can be multiple screens. And then it's possible also to have a subtitled presentation. This is the case in a significant number of countries, and then there are other countries where the presentations are dubbed into the majority language or official language or main official language of that country. And of course, it's possible to gear one's YouTube channel or channels up to live broadcasts in which case it's also possible to have simultaneous subtitles and an audience that can reach not just thousands but even millions. I'm not sure about billions. But definitely on the major television stations of the world, if an important speech, regardless of its topic, it can be life management, it can be religion or faith, it can be politics, it can be some other ideology, it can be education, it can be human relationships, it can be fashion, it can be interaction between people of different ethnic and so-called racial backgrounds, it can be anything. Then the audience easily can reach into the billions, even if all of them are not watching or listening to the presentation live, because of the time differences, because of educational, occupational, and other commitments. And there are various reasons for the presentation or presentations. Of course, to inform people, of course, to comfort people, to challenge people, to persuade people, to reassure people, convince people, and naturally to entertain people as well. To update people on what is happening in one or more fields of knowledge or human activity, to express appreciation, especially at the end of studies or at the end of someone's career, especially if it has been several decades long, at the end of someone's life, naturally, and that is called eulogy. Then it can range from very formal and very serious to very informal and funny. The former type of presentation is meant to make people solemn and think about some higher truths or concepts, such as the purpose or meaning of the human life and the ultimate destination of human beings. The latter is normally strictly for laughs. And then there can be recitations of people's favorite songs, poems, chants. They can come from real people, such as actors, actresses, comedians, writers, singers, musicians, dancers, and so forth, or from fictional characters, whether people appearing on films or on television series or programs or books or cartoons or comics and so forth. And then there are often these visual aids such as slides or PowerPoints. There are these projectors. There can be screens that are at most even hundreds of square meters in area, probably not kilometers, but hundreds of square meters in area at least. And of course, amplifiers, multiple microphones. I mentioned subtitles already. Well, handouts, of course. Now, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to refer to the chapter. No copyright infringement, of course, intended. props and accessories. So bringing concrete objects that you're talking about. For example, if you're talking about building a computer, you can bring tools that are used in the building of computer. If you're talking about farming, you can bring, for example, a shovel and a bushel of wheat and so forth. Technically, of course, if the stage is big enough, you can even have an actual tractor there, or a wheel barrow, and so forth. Of course, you can have one or more computers. You can do puppetry, mime, or dance. Puppetry in like in your hand or hands you have one or two, often two small dolls. Or then mime, you imitate someone or something without saying a word, but moving around the stage, making faces, lifting up your hands or moving your hands, your middle body, your feet, and so forth. And then, of course, dancing. And dancing can interpret a great variety of emotions and human experiences, and can, of course, be interpreted in many ways as well. And then you should, of course, try to limit yourself to 4 or 5 main points of the topic that you are talking about in order to keep your audience's interest, especially if your audience consists of millions or billions of people, whether they all watch or listen to you live or not, or recorded, is irrelevant. But the larger the audience, the more creativity you have to use, and on the other hand, the smaller number of truly important points you have to have in order to have the kind of impact on the audience, or at least many or most members of the audience, that you seek to have. And of course, you have to practice. You can practice in front of a mirror, you can practice in front of a webcam, like I'm now speaking to a webcam, even though I later plan to upload this video on YouTube. And then, of course, you have to weigh the costs of presentation. The larger the audience is, the more feedback you're likely to receive. And the more feedback you're likely to receive, the larger will probably be the number of negative or partly negative pieces of feedback. The important thing is to not lose one's calm, even though in practice it's difficult to do, especially if one is a highly emotional person, if one has a rather fragile self-esteem, if one expects to be rewarded for one's good effort. Unfortunately, life doesn't always treat us that fairly. No matter how much we try, even if we try until we are blue in the face and at the end of our wits and physical and emotional and spiritual strength, there will inevitably be some people who will not even thank us for a good effort, but will condemn or even mock what we have done. When there are some of such people in powerful places of government, politics, the media, economy, education, religion, or rather religions, and so forth, no wonder that always certain people will rather listen to them than to people who really care about others and want to help others, and never insult others even if they disagree, but always try to seek common ground, and always, especially if they are Christians, pray for those who attack them and show mercy and forgiveness to such people. And the order of presentation is so crucial. If there's a slightest bit of hesitation in the presentation, chances are that at least a portion of the audience will lose their interest. But the more smoothly the presentation goes forward, without any glitches, technical ones, without any hesitations or stutters on the part of the presenters, without any major mispronunciations of words or major grammatical errors, the more convincing the presentation is likely to be. Where the only pauses are actually so-called artistic ones to allow the audience to react, for example, by applauding. Let's see. Audiovisual education is one of the buzzwords, or should I say buzz terms, of the 21st century, although of course it started already in the 20th century. It is also called multimedia-based education. So the teachers or instructors use, for example, films, videos, radio recordings, podcasts, slides, and so forth, computer graphics, in order to teach their students. It started actually already, at least during the Second World War, after the use of training films and other visual aids. And then after the Second World War, it gradually developed and became more high-tech, and schools of different levels started to use it. Not only schools, but then museums, galleries, and then tourist destinations. Because many educators believe that children learn best by observing and copying the adults' behaviors. It is clear that learning is more effective when sensory experiences are stimulated. Even I can remember some bits and pieces of educational films that I watched in the 1980s and 1990s. Quite a long time ago, given my lifetime. The concept of audiovisual aids, however, can be traced back to the 17th century, when a Bohemian, or as we would now call him, Czech educator, he was also, however, an evangelical Christian, Mr. Jan Komenský, whose name was then Latinized to Johann Amos Comenius, who lived from 1592 to 1670, introduced pictures as teaching aids in his book Orbis Sensualium Pictus, Picture of the Sensual World. It included 150 drawings of everyday life. Drawings remained, of course, in books, especially in children's books, as the main form of illustrations until especially the early 20th century. Then gradually photographs replaced them, and had started to replace them, especially in the adults' books, starting in the second half of the 19th century. Similarly, a Swiss Enlightenment philosopher, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who lived from 1712 to 1778 and actually wrote a book about the compassionate education of children, where children would be taught to learn by doing, Emil, and J.H. Pestalozzi, who lived from 1746 to 1827, supported using visual and play materials in teaching. And soldiers were either asked or ordered to watch films, listen to recordings and so forth during the Second World War and after. And there are many audiovisual materials. There are actual films and documentaries. There are television programs, and of course abridged or cut versions of them. And then there are videos, especially with the use of YouTube. Basically anyone who has a basic level of knowledge of how the computer works, and especially in computers like mine that have a built-in web camera, basically anyone can be, or many people can be, amateur filmmakers. Then there are microforms or microfilms, slides, projected opaque materials, tape recordings, and then flashcards. In the current digital world, audiovisual aids have grown exponentially, with several multimedia such as educational DVDs, PowerPoint, television, educational series, YouTube, and other online materials. And of course, the goal is to improve the teacher's ability to present the lesson simply but yet effectively, and in a positive way, memorably, so that as much of the lesson's main points as possible will be retained by the students. And of course, since students will have multisensory experiences, learning will become more permanent. And then both the public and private sectors have to be involved. The national or federal, state or provincial or regional, and then municipal governments and other public institutions, and also private businesses and organizations and private individuals. And when the schools, whether they are elementary, high schools, colleges, seminaries, universities, or others, don't have enough money, then we need those, should I say, media benefactors, people in the public sector, people in the private sector, and their organizations, businesses, so forth, who are willing to help by producing these materials. And of course, if you have enough sources at your home, then all you need is a well-functioning computer, well-functioning web camera, and a well-functioning internet connection. You can produce those materials at home and distribute them online, upload them at least on YouTube, possibly also on Facebook, and so forth. And through this visual or visual aided instruction, abstract ideas become more understandable to the learners or students. And thus the schools will have a basis for understanding how important the use of audiovisual resources is in teaching and in learning. Studies have shown that there is a significant difference between the use and non-use of audiovisual material in teaching and learning. So the objectives are, according to this Wikipedia article on audiovisual education, to strengthen teachers' skills in making teaching learning process more effective, to attract and, which is so important, retain or keep the learner's attention. Then to generate interest across different levels of students. Then to develop lesson plans that are simple and easy to follow. Then to make the lessons more interactive and interesting. And finally, to focus on student-centered approach. And of course, why not encourage also the students to become producers of these educational materials. And such students can, in the best case scenario, become like assistant teachers already while studying. Of course, we have to make sure that we use the digital technology in a proper way. We should produce materials, whether they be videos, PowerPoint slides, or others, which seek to widen the students' understanding of the world, understanding and appreciation of different groups of people, ethnic and other ones, and which promote the kind of tolerance where we believe that every human being as an individual has a very great value, even if we strongly disagree with such individuals because of their political, ideological, religious, societal, ethnic, racial, or other beliefs. So the advantages include making it more hands-on, obviously, making it more memorable, making it more visual, making it one where it's not just passive copying from the whiteboard or currently from the laptop screen, but where the students are engaged in learning. And we learn also, well, through observation and conversation, change of ideas, and mutual constructive feedback, whose purpose is always to help us to improve as individuals, to encourage us to keep trying and keep pushing our limits, and if possible even exceeding them, or at least to reach the kinds of goals that reasonable goals that we have set for ourselves. So PowerPoint slides, according to this Wikipedia article, are the most common tool used in the classrooms, and at least ideally, such slides make the lessons more interesting, dynamic, and effective. And they also help to introduce new topics easily. And the use of audiovisual aids makes the students to remember the concept for longer periods of time. The meaning is the same as it would be if the lecture or lesson was just verbal. But it's more memorable when people can, in this case the students, can also see the concepts there, see the graphics, see the PowerPoint slides, see visual effects, and so forth. For example, if the teacher wants to teach the students about Taj Mahal, that huge building and museum, we could call it artistic mausoleum in India, then it is possible, of course, that not all the students, even in India itself, have visited the place, for example, because of their parents' poverty. However, it is possible to show Taj Mahal through various videos. In the best case scenario, you might be able to find on YouTube a channel that includes a live broadcast from Taj Mahal, or if the classroom's computers are geared to a high-speed internet connection, they might find on one or more television channels such as CNN, BBC, TV5, Deutsche Welle, even Al Jazeera, live broadcasts from Taj Mahal, or at least from near Taj Mahal, where the huge building is on the background. Um, and then it's possible to have three-dimensional images as well. And ideally, especially if the lesson is well planned, planned and replanned and so forth, and especially if at least the most mature and persuasive students in the classroom have been involved in its preparation. In that way, at least most students' attention will be focused on learning. Of course, it is possible even at the college and university and seminary level for some students to start chatting with each other, even if the purpose was benign. In other words, to exchange comments on the audiovisual presentations and what they have learned or are learning through them. Of course, they should be taught to jot down, or if they have computers, to write down by using their computers' keyboards those ideas. And then there could be at the end of the audiovisual presentation a general discussion on the question, or at least, especially if it's let's say a 3 or 4 hour lecture and the audiovisual presentation takes up at least 1 to 1.5 hours, maybe even 2 hours of it, it might be reasonable to divide it up into portions of, let's say, 15 to 30 minutes, and always then the teacher would stop the audiovisual presentation, whether a video or something else, and then ask the students pointed questions designed to enhance their learning. Audiovisual aids provide students opportunities for effective communication, and of course between themselves and the teacher, and between each other. For example, in a study on English as a foreign language, or EFL classroom, the difficulties faced by the EFL learner are lack of motivation, lack of exposure to the target language, and lack of pronunciation by the teacher. And such difficulties can be overcome by audio as purpose of communication and visual as more exposure. And the students can become positively curious about learning. The teachers can and actually should provide them with links to the materials in order to encourage them to learn more by themselves, independently, yet interacting with the materials, interacting with fellow students, interacting with their teachers. Of course, digital technology has its disadvantages. It can become more image-based than fact-based. Some students, especially if the teachers don't manage to motivate them to stay on the topic, can easily start just playing games with their computers or tablets or mini tablets or even smartphones, especially if they lose interest. And it's possible to overuse audiovisual material, in which case many students easily become bored, especially at the elementary and secondary levels of education, let alone the preschool education. And the teachers often have to spend hours preparing the lessons carefully enough, maybe even several hours per lesson, even if it was, let's say, a 45 to 60 minute lesson, to make it run as smoothly as possible, to make it as interactive and interesting as possible, and to attain and keep or retain at least most learners' attention from the start of the lesson to its end. And of course, the teacher should be trained to become familiar with the new audiovisual equipment, so that they can use it smoothly. And of course, if it is an e-learning classroom, the teacher should absolutely make sure that they know how to switch off the tablets so that no students will start, whether because of boredom or childishness or mischievousness or simple challenging of the limits, playing with them and then ignore the teacher's advice. I have some sad experiences of that in the recent past, which I'm not going to dwell on in this video lesson or lecture. And then, while some students can easily chat with each other, even when it actually disturbs others, some others may feel reluctant to ask questions while the film or video is playing, and in small rooms it can be a physical barrier. And then, of course, in those many countries of the world, especially in Africa, but also here in Asia, to some extent in Latin America and in Oceania, outside, of course, Australia and New Zealand, where electricity is not readily available, especially in the countryside, then such audiovisual aids simply cannot be used except sporadically. So while the audiovisual aids are definitely important in the teaching and learning processes, especially increasingly in the 21st century, they should not be the only tools for teaching and learning. There should be thinking, there should be classroom discussions, there should be writing assignments, role plays, and so forth. So in conclusion, ideally, and when properly and maturely and well-managingly used, the audiovisual aids help the teachers to present their lessons effectively and the students to learn and retain or keep the concepts better, so memorize them better and for a longer time. And when properly used and when the students are motivated to learn, through the audiovisual aids, they can learn to think more critically and analytically and independently, and evaluate more efficiently what they are learning and its ultimate benefit for their lives, not just for their courses, but for their remaining lives here on the earth. And the audiovisual aids help to remove abstract concepts through visual presentation. However, if they are used passively, haphazardly, if the teachers are content only with the equipment functioning faultlessly but do not engage their students in critically posing questions that require deeper thinking and processing, then the impact is likely to be quite superficial and fleeting. And unfortunately, some students may just start playing with their digital devices because they feel bored. And especially if the students or many students, for whatever reason or reasons, do not give the teachers constructive feedback or clear ideas on what kinds of classroom exercises and homework assignments they should have, and especially if they are given the option, like I have given in several or many courses of mine until now, to have video projects or otherwise digital projects or major course assignments, then chances are that many students will not really know what they are doing and why. Or even if they do know, they might not be motivated to try even nearly their best, and will likely then leave most of the good effort to those relatively few students in their group who always are motivated to try their best. So this is why even those teachers who have been teaching for, let's say, 40 to 50 years, or those few who have been teaching longer, should be trained. Teachers, regardless of their levels of teaching experience and their lengths of teaching experience, should be trained to use these audiovisual equipments and aids properly. And this should then cause proper changes to the schools and larger educational systems, such as countries' curriculums or curricula, so that there will be different alternatives for the classroom activities and for the activity-based learning's implementation through audiovisual aids. And the government should fund, or the governments rather, should fund resources to purchase audiovisual aids in schools. So there are many ways to present well. Of course, ultimately it depends on the presenters, usually the speakers, ability to manage the audience, to get the audience's attention, or at least the attention of the highest possible majority of the audience's members, and to keep it, and not to be distracted if, for example, these devices fail to work. So that's why there should be always a backup plan, that in case these fine, high-tech 21st century digital tools stop working, there should be at least a written script or a printed script. And there should be alternate activities, such as creative classroom discussions, role plays, and so forth, to keep the audience, whether the students or others, interested, and to have a fruitful discussion, a successful lesson or lecture or presentation, even if the technology failed to work properly. Okay, take care, God bless, and I'll be back at some point again.